And it seems hopes of a post-election bounce back in new vehicle sales were realized in July. This as total new vehicle sales represented a rare year-on-year improvement. But does July's improvement disguise the continued weakness of the 2024 new vehicle market? Earlier, we touched base with the Financial Mail's editor-at-large, David Furlonger, who shed light on the data.
In a year like this, any good news should be celebrated. It's only the second time this year that month-on-month sales, that's month with the previous year, have improved. And it's partly down to what you call the post-election bounce, because vehicle sales had been slowed by political uncertainty. There seems to be a greater confidence now that the Government of National Unity will provide a more stable business environment. The ABSA Purchasing Index, the latest one, is very positive. It's the highest rate since 2022. And if you look at the economic signs, I mean, if we are, or as we are told, there could be 2 interest rate reductions later this year, even one would be positive. The National Automobile Dealers Association is saying that some buyers are already coming into the market on the assumption there will be 2 interest rate cuts later this year. And generally there is more optimism out there. But this is a lousy year. I mean, we're still 6.3% behind where we were last year. So we're still almost certainly going to be lower by the end of the year than we were last year, which means that at the end of 2024, we're still going to have a smaller market than we had before COVID. So it's a very slow, laboured process, but a glimmer of hope in July. And perhaps this will continue into the rest of the second half.
Also interesting, I think, David, to take stock of what we're seeing with passenger vehicles versus commercial vehicles. So, of course, that speaks to consumer confidence as well as a business.
Yes, it does. I mean, we still have this weird market here where the biggest selling vehicle of all is a bakkie. You know, the rest of the world, they have their heads on straight. But here, we love our bakkies. I remember a few years ago when vans started coming into the country and people said that was going to be the death of the bakkie market. But we still, you know, the leader in last month's recovery was cars. And what we're seeing increasingly is entry-level vehicles. So the luxury vehicles are really struggling, sales there are really struggling. But we're seeing entry-level vehicles, but more and more we're seeing sports utility vehicles. These vehicles that can do all sorts of things, but we're seeing more of the smaller SUVs coming through now as well. Toyota has just announced the launch of its Starlet Cross, which will probably, and I have no reason to suspect otherwise, will probably be a success like all the Toyota brands are. So people are looking for smaller, more versatile vehicles. So yeah, there's a lot of hope out there, but let's not get carried away on 1 month.
Also, it's interesting, David, I've seen numbers emerging from auto brands globally. I think VW comes to mind at this time, fighting for margins. And I think that's also very interesting because that speaks about pricing and I guess the auto companies acknowledging that consumers can't afford certain vehicles, but of course still needing to make the margins.
Yeah, look, there are 2 lots of margins there. There's the motor companies and then there's the dealers. And I was talking to the head of the National Automobile Dealers Association yesterday, who says that there's virtually no margin on new cars. The money comes from commissions, from used vehicles and from after-sales service. Certainly the motor companies themselves are looking for decent margins, but in a competitive market as we have now, it's very difficult because clearly price has a lot to do with it. It's not just about the fact that people are buying down into smaller, cheaper vehicles. It's the fact that we have so many brands out here now. There's over 50 car brands in South Africa in a market which represents less than 1% of the global market. So over 50, more are coming in at the moment. several more Chinese are either coming in or have said they're going to come into the market. So margins very, very difficult in such a competitive market.
I must ask you, David, based also just on the economic reality of South Africans, when these auto companies make an assessment of our economy and decide this is the place to be, of course, aware of these macros, still though, entering this saturated market, or is it part of what we've spoken about in the past, actually, just maybe using South Africa to make sure that they're ready for the continental story?
The continental part of it, South Africa being the springboard into Africa, clearly is part of it. But when you look, and let's take the Chinese companies in particular, which are coming in quite big numbers at the moment, their own market is pretty much full. They're looking for new markets. They haven't explored Africa really terribly well in the past. They see that by some distance it is the biggest one in Africa. So yes, that springboard is the clear part of the strategy, but also the fact that the South African market, by comparison to anywhere else in Africa, they believe still has scope. I'm not sure. I suspect that some of the new brands that are coming in may not last very long. That's a personal view. I apologize if I'm putting off people buying, but logically, there are too many brands already, and new brands coming in is going to make it very difficult for some of them to stay in the long term.